morning.
Or would you like me to use the microphone? Okay. I think that probably goes for you too, Ralph. Well, good morning. Really glad to see you this morning. Glad you took the time to come and learn something more, both about Shanghai American School, as well as, if you will, good governance practices, as well as things that you, as parents, need to ask us about, things that you need to make sure that we are, the questions you're asking, the questions you want us to answer for you. I'm very delighted to introduce Dr. Ralph Davison, whom I met a number of years ago when I was head of school at Hong Kong International School. He worked to help find us a new head of school. He has come there and here to do consulting, international consulting. He has I can tell you from personal experience, he has a long and distinguished background in education. He was head of the Greensboro Country Day School for 20 years. Think of that, 20 years. A long-serving head of school or superintendent, a long-serving board, chair of the board, truly makes a difference for continuity. You can work together, you can create what is called leadership through partnership, where the board works well with the head of school, with the superintendent, all for the benefit of your sons and daughters for a great education. Before I turn the mic over to Ralph, I really want to remind you, and I hope you've all read, we are having an election for another member of the board of directors. We are mostly an elected board. 6 out of the 9 members are elected. So we are looking for good candidates who are interested, first of all, in learning more about what it means to be on a board, learn more about what a board actually does, work long-term strategically with colleagues on the board. Not to just improve food service, but to think, where should Shanghai American School be in 5 years or 10 years? That's the real role of the board. So Ralph is going to go through some of these things with you as part of this presentation to give you a sense of how you can participate in the school in a good way to really make a difference for your sons and your daughters. So he'll leave some time at the end for questions. I suspect you have lots and lots of questions. So again, welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you very much, Richard. And good morning.
Good morning.
Ni hao. That's all my Chinese. That's not true. I can say a couple of other words, but I've been working in Asia now for about 8 years, and I'm really disappointed in myself that I don't speak better Chinese after this time, but it's a hard language. To me, it's very hard. Richard, as Richard said, I've been in education for a number of years. I've been a head of school. I also am a board member. I serve on the board of the Collegiate School in Richmond, Virginia. I've been on that board for 8 years now. And Collegiate School has done some remarkable things, some of which I'll share with you this morning. I also served on the board of the National Association of Independent Schools, which is a big umbrella organization of all U.S. independent schools and many international schools, including this one. And so have had a lot of opportunity to see a lot going on in schools all around the world for many, many years. And what we're going to do today is we're going to concentrate on a couple of things. As we said in the email, or I don't know how you learned about this, I assume it was from an email, is that right? Yeah. As we said in the email, we're going to concentrate on the areas of leadership and governance. There are a lot of questions that you as parents, could and should be asking at the school, and we only have until 11 o'clock. So we have a short period of time. I'm going to leave about 20 minutes at the end for questions that you may have. But we're going to concentrate on the areas of leadership and governance. Because here's the deal. Insofar as your leadership, that's Richard and the principals and everybody else, insofar as your leadership really understands where a school like this should be going, and insofar as your board of directors really understands where a school like this should be going, then it's going to work well for your children. And the end game for your children is going to be a very, very positive endgame. If the leadership does not understand it, and if the leadership is somehow in turmoil, there is a direct effect on you and your children. And so this is where we're going to be going today. And let me say this. In addition to all the things that Richard said about me, I'm also a father and a husband. But I'm also a father. I have 4 children. They're all grown. But I educated them in a school just very similar to this. I also am a grandfather. I have 9 grandchildren. And it's wonderful. And they range in age from 7 years old as the youngest to, I hate to say this, 19 is the oldest. And he's at university now. But so I'm seeing my grandchildren go through schools just like this. And I also spend most of my time working with schools, a lot of schools in Asia, but a lot of schools in the U.S., and Europe, South America, and so on, and have a sense of the landscape of where schools are going. And here is something that's really important for us to remember. When you think about the world in which you grew up, think about yourself when you were 9 years old. And think about the world that your children are living in now. Is there a difference? Huge difference, especially here. Isn't that true in China? Huge difference in the world. Think about the world. Just try to imagine and project out the world in which your children will be living when they are your age. When they're sitting around in rooms like this, thinking about education for their own children, do we think it'll be different from the world we live in today? Of course it will be. The rate of change is accelerating faster and faster and faster and faster. We're talking about technology, but most importantly, we're talking about global interaction. Global interaction. And so one of the big questions that you as parents need to be asking of yourselves and of the people in the school is, how are you preparing my child for a world that doesn't even exist yet? How is the teaching and learning today, how must it be different from the teaching and learning that I experienced when I was in school, so that these children will be prepared for this global, high-tech world that we didn't grow up in? So keep that in mind as we go forward. I'd just like to know a little bit something about you. How many of you have children in the elementary school? Okay, good, a lot of you. How many of you have children in the middle school? A lot of you too. How many of you have children in the high school? Okay, you're a good group. How many of you seek to have your children go to college and university? Only a few? No. Is there anybody who does not seek to have his or her child to go to college or university? Okay, of course. That's why you're here, isn't it? Yes. How many, and I really am curious about this, I think I know the answer, but how many of you seek to have your child or children go to college or university, or at least apply to college and university in the U.S. as opposed to somewhere else? Typically, it will be about 80% of you. That's probably what it would be in a school like this. And of course, there are other places in the world where you want to go. All right, good. So as we try to frame this world that our children are trying to be prepared for, and the first step, but not the last step, the first step is to go from here to college or university, I want to tell you something about me that you don't know, and was not written in. Did they send a little biographical information out? No? Was there a little paragraph? Okay, somebody read it. Okay. But this was not in the biographical information. We were talking about 9 years old. When I was 9 years old, I knew what I wanted to be. I knew what I wanted to do with my life. And I was absolutely sure that I had to do it. What I wanted to be was a mouseketeer. I see some puzzled looks. The Walt Disney Corporation had a television show back in the 1950s, when I was 9 years old, called the Mickey Mouse Club. And they had all these perky young people who came out and they sang and they danced and they wore these little Mickey Mouse ears. And it was live television. And it was, of course, black and white and very grainy as it was back then and so on. But I thought it was the most wonderful thing I'd ever seen in my life. And every day at 4 o'clock, I would come running into the television room and I'd put myself in the rocker and I'd turn it on and I'd put on my Mickey Mouse ears and I would watch the Mickey Mouse Club. It was fantastic. And so one day I decided, all right, it's time to take the bull by the horns. I need to do something about my ambition. I took a piece of paper and I wrote a letter. Dear Mr. Disney, my name is Ralph Davison and I want to be a mouseketeer. And I explained why, I explained what I thought the value I could give to the show, and I put it in an envelope and I wrote Walt Disney, Burbank, California. Personal. And I mailed it. It's a true story. And then I waited. I waited, and I waited, and I waited. And one day, I went to the mailbox. That's it. I've kept that letter for 60 years. And I couldn't believe it. There it was. And I quickly took it up to my room. I never told my parents. And I opened it up, and it said, Dear Ralph, because you wrote personal on the envelope, Mr. Disney actually read your letter. And Mr. Disney wants you to know that there are going to be auditions for the Mickey Mouse Club in your city. I grew up in Washington, D.C. In your city on this date at this time, and he hopes you'll be there. I didn't know what to do. I was so excited. I grabbed the letter and I ran downstairs and I said, Mom, Dad, guess what? We're moving to California. Well, they had other ideas. And they weren't sure that we were moving to California. And this very sad end of the story is that I never even went to the audition. Isn't that awful? A professional roadblock at the age of 9. It was tough. But the reason I raise this story is that even at age 9, I knew that this corporation was really an extraordinary corporation. It was different from other corporations. Walt Disney did his first Mickey Mouse movie in 1928. He did his first big feature-length movie. Does anybody remember what it is? Cartoon movie back in the 1930s? Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It was classic. Everybody's heard of it, haven't they? But when he proposed it, nobody had ever done anything like that. It was something that was completely foreign to people's thinking. And he couldn't find any financial backers for it. So he and his wife mortgaged everything they had, including their home, to get the money to do this. He had a vision that nobody else could see. And part of his job was to convince others to see the vision too. And he was right. He was right. There are corporations like Disney that have vision. Lots of them. Can you think of another? What are some of the cutting-edge corporations that you know of in the world? Sure. Apple. Let me tell you another true story. On Wednesday morning, I was walking on the Nanjing Road pedestrian mall. How many stores are there? I mean, hundreds of stores. There was one store in the Nanjing Road pedestrian mall where there were hundreds of people lined up to get into. And what was it? Apple. It's like the Walt Disney store. Somebody has a vision for something that doesn't exist yet, and they help to bring others along. A lot of people come kicking and screaming into that sort of thing. But then they create history with their vision. We could name company after company after company. So here's why I raise all of this. What do we want for our children? Do we want to prepare our children for the world that you and I grew up in? And my world was a lot older than yours. But do we want to prepare them for that? I don't think so. I don't think so. Because that's not the world that they'll be living in. We need to prepare them for a world that will be different. A world that doesn't even exist yet. And these are the kinds of skills that we want our children to be able to learn, and these are the kinds of things that we should be asking Richard, the board of directors, the teachers in a school like this. What are we doing to prepare our children for this world of the future? Now, there are glimpses that we can have into that. A happy ending for my Mickey Mouse story is that a couple of weeks ago, I guess it was last week, I actually was at Disney World. And I was at Disney World presenting at a conference of the National Association of Independent Schools. We had 4,000 educators from all over the world there in Disney World. And we talked about this whole concept that I'm talking with you about. The topic that I was talking about was daring to govern strategically. And one of the things we said was, well, as I've said to you, what is our product as schools? What is our product? The students. It's children. It's what we hope they will become as we go forward. Let me ask you this question. How do we know in a school like this that we're doing well? How do you measure it? Do you have any idea? How many people are business people in the room, or at least related to business people? Okay. I've served on a corporate board. Some of you probably have too. How do we know when our businesses are doing well? You compare it to the market and the extent to which we make a profit. It's pretty simple. Here's an interesting idea. Any fool can make a profit for the short term. We can make decisions whereby we make profitable income for us for the short term. But very few people can do it for the long term. Disney does it for the long term. Disney's been in business. His first movie in 1928. Walt Disney's no longer alive, but this corporation is very alive, and it's there. In fact, they're building a theme park here near Shanghai, aren't they? Yeah. And it's spreading all over the world. It's a very, very successful corporation. Apple makes profits. IBM makes profits, and so on and so forth. These are companies that have a vision for the long term. We need to have a vision for the long term for our children. Is it enough that our children are getting straight A's in 5th grade? Is that, if they're getting straight A's in 5th grade, do we know that the school is doing well?
Maybe short term.
Short term, yes. Short term. Thank you for answering. This can be interactive, by the way. Thank you. Yeah, for short term. I met with your board last night for 4 hours. And this is not the first time I've met with them. I met with them for 2 days back in August. I'm going to meet with them for 2 days again in August coming up. But last night we were downtown in this lovely building overlooking the river and so on. It's beautiful. And we met for 4 hours. And we talked about this. How can we know that we're doing well as a school? And we talked about, and I hope you will hear about this from them, we talked about these markers of success, and I don't have time to go into all them all this morning, but there are markers of success, measurable key indices that we can measure. Well, one of them is, it isn't enough to talk about where our kids go to college. And I'm going to give you more about that later on this morning with some very interesting statistics. We want to know Yes, we want to know, do they get in? We want to know, though, how well do they do when they get there? We want to know, do they graduate? We want to know, what do they do after they graduate? We want to know, what kind of relationships do they have in their families, in their communities? We want to know, to what degree do they give back to their communities? To what degree is the world going to be a little bit different for the better because they are in it? We want to know all these things. And I asked the board, I said, do we know this about Shanghai American School graduates? What do you think the answer was? No, we don't. And you know why we don't? We simply haven't asked. We haven't asked. It's a simple thing to do. And I've counseled schools all over the world. Start now asking these questions. Ask your alumni, their first year in college. Ask them after they graduated. Ask them when they're your age and they have children and families of their own. Ask them these questions. And you'll have very, very rich, measurable data. And you can go back to a group like this and say, yep, we know we're doing well because we know what has happened to our product. And I urge you as parents to hold the board's feet to the fire. To ask them, to say, you want to know, don't you want to know the answer to that question? Because it foretells what's going to be, what your children's experience is going to be. You should want to know the answer to that question. Okay. So that's our product. Do any of these belong to you? I took this picture. Did anybody recognize them? I took this a few months ago. This is yours, these are your students. But I love this picture because it has so much into it. We have excited kids. One of them eating an American hot dog. This is the Shanghai American School, isn't it? And we've got kids in the background there who are clearly involved in being excited about whatever they're doing. This is our product, but it's not our full product. Our full product is what I just described to you. This is just an intro product, but a very important one. There are lots of measurable steps. So let me ask you some provocative questions. We know we need teachers. Why do we need an admin team? They cost, don't they? Why do we need them? Well, administration is different from education, but why do we need them? Could we save some money by getting rid of them? Socrates was a very famous teacher. Socrates taught in the Forum in Athens, in ancient Greece. And he sat under a tree. I've seen it. Maybe some of you have too. Sat under a very old tree in the Forum in Athens. And he taught his pupils, including Plato, who was kind of a famous guy himself. He didn't have the administrators. But then it rained one day, and the tree wasn't enough to keep the rain out. And I could go on and on. You can't educate 3,400 students under a tree. You can't. You have to have things that support what the teachers do in the classrooms. You have to have buildings. You have to have grounds. You have to have transportation. You have to have food. You have to have meetings like this. But most importantly, you have to have vision for the future, because this kind of work never stands still. It is always creating for the future. And so this is what the administration does. It's the same kind of thing that Richard does here. Richard, his job is like the conductor of an orchestra. His job is to make sure that all of the best players are in the seats in the orchestra. If you can imagine this image. His job is to make sure that they have the best repertoire of music, that they are all playing from the same page at the same time, in the same tempo, with the same dynamics. And when that happens, you have a beautiful symphony. If it doesn't happen, you have a lot of noise. Same thing is true in schools. It's his job to make sure all of this comes together in ways that work for you and your children. That's what he does. The board members, and this is a fundamental thing. Richard talked to you about the election. The board members' job is to make sure that they have the right Richard, that they have the right superintendent, that they have a vision for the future for the school, and that they are supporting it adequately. Sometimes, and I won't mention any names, but sometimes the board goes awry. Sometimes there's trouble among board members. And when that happens, the conversation becomes all about the board. And when the conversation is all about the board, what are we not talking about? The children. We're not talking about the children when it's all about the board. And we must be talking about the children. Why are we here if we're not talking about the children? And this is my message to the board as well. And boy, they're doing great. They are really doing great. I'm enjoying working with this group. So what is so daring about governing well? Why do I use the word daring? There are 9 of them. Why is it daring to do it right as opposed to doing it for the short term? There's risk. What kind of risk do you think there is? Yeah. Taking a chance of doing something new. And the board, the school, they have customers. I mean, does anybody pay money to come here? Yeah, you're customers. You're customers. And as customers, you have an idea of what you want done here. And my guess is that every one of you has maybe a little bit of a different idea. I mean, that's human nature. That's probably true. And so, when the board is thinking about the future, as only the board can do, when the board is trying to plan for the kind of world we've been talking about, it's risky because not everybody has the same vision as the board. I was explaining to one of your members here this morning that in my own school, we made the decision that the future was going to be much more technologically based than it was at the time. And back in the year 2000, 14 years ago, we became one of the first schools in the United States to introduce a one-to-one laptop program. Think about it. 14 years ago, nobody was doing it. Nobody was doing it. Nobody could understand why you'd spend that kind of money. Nobody could understand, and even the faculty didn't totally understand what they would do with these machines in the classroom. Parents were concerned that we would be frying their children's brains with the wireless. Truly, you wouldn't believe the things that came our way. Not because they're mean people, they just didn't understand. Whenever you are looking at the future that is different from the present, people get upset because they don't understand it. But we have to be looking at the future, otherwise we're not serving our children. Which brings me to this gentleman. Does anybody know Milton Chen's work? Ever heard of him? He's a brilliant thinker. And he is behind something that I know you've heard about. He was one of the original people to evolve a program known as Sesame Street. Anybody ever heard of it? Sure, Sesame Street. When my oldest son, who is now 41 years old, when he was a little boy, we would turn on the television when Sesame Street came on, and he just had to hear the theme music. And he would come running across the living room and put himself in front of the TV, and he would watch it and watch it and watch it. And what Sesame Street was doing was they were saying, yes, facts are important, knowledge is important, but what is even more important than the knowledge is what people do with the knowledge. And so they were teaching children what to do with numbers and letters and words, and teaching them how to become innovators and not simply students. Sesame Street was doing that 40 years ago, and they're still doing it. Sesame Street is in all of these countries. Started in the United States, but is in all of these countries now, and is doing it extraordinarily well. Milton Chen was also at this meeting in Florida last week. He and I have become good friends. We spent a lot of time talking. He has published this book, and I commend it to you. I'm not getting any royalties from it, but I commend it to you. You'll get a concept of the vision of where your schools should be going by reading this book. I gave a copy of it. He inscribed it, and I gave it to the board last night. And so there is at least one copy here in Kansas. I'm sure you can order it from Amazon as well. All right. This is what Milton Chen says we should be doing. We should be educating students who are critical thinkers, who can collaborate and lead well, and who have global perspectives. Does anybody disagree with any of that? I can't imagine we would, because when we're talking about companies like Google, when we're talking about companies that are producing innovative things, this is the way they do it. It isn't enough just to learn stuff. We have to be able to do something with stuff, and we have to be able to do it with other people in teams, many of whom are going to be very different from ourselves, come from different nationalities, different backgrounds, different religions, whatever it may be, different ages. We have to teach these skills to our children. Our children will be living in a world that is even more global than the world that you and I live in, and we have to be prepared for that. All right, I'm going to jump ahead here. Is this the kind of school that you went to? Did anybody go to a school like I've been describing? Some of you did? Good. Good. I didn't. I was educated in the French educational system. Et je parle français couramment, comme tout le monde qui fait cela. The French system went something like this, and I'm told that it's very similar to the Chinese system. You can tell me if I'm right. We were all sitting there in rows with our feet on the floor and our hands on the desks, and we were listening to a teacher talking to us. And the teacher taught us stuff. And we memorized what the teacher taught us. And then, when it was time for us to be examined, we told the teacher exactly what the teacher had taught us. And that was education. Does that sound familiar? Yeah, sure. A lot of us went through that. And I hope you didn't go through what I went through when I didn't know the answers to the questions. I have the scars on my hands to prove it. This is true. What they used to do, I remember this in 3rd grade, if you didn't know the answer to the math questions, the teacher would look at us very sternly and say, les mains, which means your hands. And we put our hands on the desk, and the teacher would take a ruler and go, whack! Yeah, scary, isn't it? And that was to inspire us to be better. Did it work? Did it work? Well, I don't know. I mean, I've got a PhD. I guess it worked.
If they went back and interviewed you, right? You might say, hey, it worked.
I'm here to tell you that that kind of education will not prepare our children for the world of tomorrow. It just won't do it. Not at all. In fact, it was only when people of my generation began to break out of the box and be thinking about things differently from this group of teachers that we were able to help make the way for the world as it is today. No, I don't think that kind of education is. All right. As we change our thinking about schools, this is the last thing I want you to read, that very last statement. The biggest obstacle to school change is our memories. Our memories. We think as parents, and we want to do the right thing for our children. We absolutely want to. And we think we're doing the right thing when we think about what it was like for us, and we seek that from them. But I don't want what I went through for my children or my grandchildren, because it just plain does not work anymore for the future. Okay, so let's get to some key questions that you should be asking. And I may not get to all of them. I have 6 of them. But I want to try to give you a sense of how this should be worked. Key question number 1 is, what makes a good or a great school? You should be asking that of Richard, of the board members, of your teachers. Because you want that for your children. You want nothing less for your children. And this is the answer. Notice that one of the first groups we have up here is, whoop, I pushed the wrong button. Sorry. Is parents. If the school is not supported by you, the school doesn't have a prayer about doing anything. You are a very, very important part of this whole thing. And we need to go all the way down to the board. Question number 2, why should you care about school governance? And we've already talked about that pretty well, so I don't want to spend a lot of time. School accreditation depends on it. Effective administration depends on it. Community relations depend on it. But most importantly, effective teaching and learning. If you don't have the right people in the seats at the board level, none of this is going to happen. None of it's going to happen. And as parents who elect board members, you should be asking these people who are running for the board, why are you running? What are you seeking to do? And if they tell you, I'm running because I want to get rid of the 3rd grade math teacher, I don't think she's any good. Is that long-term or short-term thinking? That's short-term. If they say we want to make the cafeteria food better, that's short-term. I mean, these are important issues, all of them. I'm not saying they're not important, but that's not what the board does. The board is charged with thinking about the long term for this school, what we have to do to prepare our children for the future, and to provide the resources to get it done. How many of you have seen the strategic plan for SAS? Oh dear. And you know what? I knew that was going to be the answer, because I talked to the board about it last night. My dream for you, well, let me try something else. How many of you have an idea of what is in the school's mission statement? Some of you, but not all of you. No. I'm sorry. I really am, because a school that is moving along really well, the school's going to do all the things that we talked about this morning, is going to be a school that is really solidly involved in the mission. The mission is clear to everybody. After all, if you don't know where you're going, how can you know when you've gotten there? The mission has to be very clear to everybody. There's a good mission statement for this school. Out of that mission statement needs to come a strategic plan. That's the roadmap for how we're going to get there. And that does exist, but you don't know it because and it's not your fault. You don't know it because the board and the administration had not taken the trouble to really lift that up to you and show it to you and explain why the steps are there and when they're going to do what they're going to do and why they're going to do it. And my advice to them is they need to do that because you need to be part of the process. Okay? So, and out of that mission, out of the strategic plan should come annual goals for Richard and annual goals for the board members. You don't know Richard's goals, do you? You don't know the board's goals, do you? And it's not your fault, because they haven't told you. That's true. It's not your fault. But they need to tell you. And this is the advice that I'm giving you. So one of the questions you should be asking Richard is what are your goals, Richard? I'd like to know that if I were a parent here. I'd like to know what are you going to do? And I'd like to know that of all the board members. What are your goals? What are you going to do? How will my child's life be better because you're sitting in that seat? I want to know that. Okay. I'm going to zoom ahead here. School accreditation is important, but I want to spend some time on something else here. A lot of good stuff here you're not hearing. All right, let's get through that. This is your mission, by the way, and I'm going through it very quickly because I want to get to the key words so that you have a sense of what they look like. Here they are. These are the key words that come from your mission statement and your core values. Passion for learning, integrity, compassion, courage, dreams, responsibility, diversity, individual value, collaboration, relationships, global citizens, creativity, critical thinking, personal fulfillment. Do these words sound like the kinds of skills that our kids need to inhabit the future we've been talking about? They sure do. You should be very proud of your mission statement. Very proud of your core values. And everybody should be pointing to them for everything that happens in the school. Every course that is taught, every activity that is done, every parent discussion that we have, every board action, every teacher who is hired, should all be done to uplift this. Because this is what's going to be really good for our kids as they prepare themselves for the second half of the 21st century. Okay, let's go to this one. Here's a question. Is SAS more like a U.S. public school or a U.S. private school? And the answer to this is really important for you and your kids. What do you think? I hear public, I hear private, public, hybrid. Well, you know what? I think it is a hybrid. It is a hybrid. For example, in U.S. private schools, we don't elect the board members. We don't. They're appointed. The board is called a self-perpetuating board. And the board spends a lot of time trying to determine what its goals are and how they relate to the school's mission. Then they go out and find people who are going to help to move that forward because they have certain talents and experience. When you have an elected board like we do in public schools, that doesn't necessarily happen. Sometimes it does, but it doesn't necessarily happen. You can make that happen because you vote. This is one of the main reasons we're talking this morning. You vote. At least 50% of you do. 50% of you don't, from what I'm told. But 50% of you vote, and I hope it'll be even higher. And I hope that when you look at who is running for the board, that you get inspired, smart, dedicated, hardworking, visionary people who are going to help your children to do all the things that we have in the mission statement, and not people who are short-term thinkers, because anybody can do that. It takes something really special to do the long-term stuff. And that's what I hope you'll be voting for. So, but in many ways, the school is like a private school. And let's take a look at them. Its mission, its organization, its finances, and its goals for students are very, very similar to private schools in the U.S., some of the best private schools in the U.S. And there's a reason why you should want it to be that way. And let's talk about that. Let's see, let me go ahead. There are 9 indicators of school quality. And I don't care, it doesn't matter whether we're talking about public or private schools. When we have intimacy, even in a school this large, teachers know our students. Do they? Do you think so? Somebody's shaking your head. Do you think that the teachers who teach your children, do they know them? They should. I mean, how big are the classes? 20? That's not too many. The teacher should know the children. There should be an intimate thing. They should know who they are, what their strengths are, and so on and so forth. That typically happens in a school like this. Not always guaranteed in a public school. Academic rigor. That typically happens in a school like this. And this is what we mean by academic rigor. How many of your children in the middle school take Algebra 1 by the 8th grade? Those of you who are in middle school. My guess is that virtually everybody takes Algebra 1 by the 8th grade. Not solely in public schools. We've got kids taking it in 9th grade and even 10th grade. And when you take Algebra 1 in the 10th grade, how much of the higher maths do you get? How much calculus can you study when you start Algebra 1 in the 10th grade? The answer is 0. You can't do it. But when you take it in the 8th grade, you can. And these are gateway courses for college and university. So it's very important that that happened in a school like this. Leadership and developing team skills. How many of our kids are involved in sports, or involved in theater, or involved in clubs, or involved in something where they're having to collaborate with others? Remember, collaboration is a very important future skill. The answer is, I think, most of our kids are doing that sort of thing. And in fact, a school like this, and certainly virtually every private school in the U.S., they're looking at every student and saying, all right, what is this student's talent? What is this student's interest? What does this student do well? And how can we nurture that? In larger schools, kids fall between the cracks. Nobody asks that question. And we don't want that for our kids. One of the things that I've done here, and I love to do it every school I go to, I go up to a student and I'll say, what are you good at? And here I get an answer every time. I do. And that's very important, because everybody needs to know that. You need to know that. I need to know that. We have to have a sense of where we fit in the world, and what our place is, and what we do well. Okay? We talk about virtue and character, and I spend comfort with diversity, and we talk about 21st century technology. We've already done that. This is an important piece. Success by proxy, attending America's most respected colleges and universities. What percentage do you think of public school graduates go to college? You have any idea? No. It's a very small percentage. And in fact, it depends on where you are. The overall high school graduation rate in the U.S., overall, is about 89%. That means 11% never graduate. In some of the inner city schools, in places like Chicago and Brooklyn, New York, where I happen to have been born, it's only about 64% who graduate from high school. Here's another thought. Of those who graduate from high school, already a smaller percentage, how many go on to college? And of those who go on to college, how many actually graduate from that college? What do you think the percentage is of kids who are admitted to college and actually graduate? What do you think it is? 68%? 60%? Anybody think it's higher? Would you want it to be higher for your children? Yeah, you'd want it to be 100% for your children, wouldn't you? Well, let's take a look at some of this. If we take 100 ninth graders, 67 of them, on average, will graduate from high school. 38 will enter college. 26 will stay as sophomores. 18 will graduate, not in 4 years, in 6 years. Are you shocked by those figures? Yeah, it is shocking. We don't think about it that much. Because most of the people we know, our kids go to college and then they graduate. But it's not true for the public at large. A school like this should be preparing kids who are going to graduate and who are going to do well while they're there. Not just going to make it, but are going to do well. And should be preparing kids who are going to do well after they graduate, all the things we've already talked about. What about, this is the U.S. Is it different in other parts of the world, do you think?
In China is different. It's very hard to get in, but
Yeah.
those people will get out.
So you think in China, this number might even be lower, but this number would be higher. Yeah, I don't have the statistics for China, unfortunately, but I do have for some other countries. Let's take a look at it. This is the percentage of the age cohort who, just by virtue of their age, could be in college or university, and then the number who actually, percentage who actually graduate. Are you shocked by this? Yeah. Yeah. Do you know how many people in the United States, I'm sure many of you have doctoral degrees as well. How many people have doctoral degrees in the United States? What percentage of the population do you think? Any idea? It's like 1 or 2%. It's very small. When you think of the whole group, and not everybody needs it, a doctor or should get it, but still, we aspire for our children to be well educated, whatever that means for us. But the number is quite small. And by being in a school like this, where people know our children, and where they have high expectations, and you have high expectations, for doing well not only with the course material, but in being able to do something with what they learn, and go out into the world and have transformative futures in the world. We're talking about you're in rarefied atmosphere when you're in a school like this. Here's some more countries. Essentially the same thing. The numbers aren't really that different all around. I'm standing in front of you, I apologize. The numbers aren't really that different. But there they are. Here's another very important piece. This is what we'll call the competitive edge. These are statistics for U.S. private schools, but it's very similar for international schools like SAS around the world. What percentage of students in the U.S. are educated by private schools, do you think? What percentage? 50, 20? 9%. 9% of the total population is educated by private schools. So that means 91% are educated by public schools. But take a look at this. I mean, this may not be your college list that you aspire for your children. It's not a bad list. Not a bad list. There's some pretty good schools on that list. But let's look at it. Let's take Amherst. 58% of the students at Amherst come from public schools. 41% come from U.S. private schools. Remember, private schools educate 9% of the population, but 41% of Amherst students are from private schools. And these are schools like SAS. So we should aspire for those kinds of things. There is a competitive advantage for being in a place like this when it comes from getting in to these schools. But then there's the whole issue of staying in, and the whole issue of graduating, and the whole issue of doing well afterwards, and so on and so forth. Any questions about any of these numbers that I've shown you? Yes?
I have some questions about receive the students from private school because the tuition fee, you think, or only because of education? The students from private school is voltage?
That's a very good question. Let me repeat it for those of you who couldn't hear it. Are there more private school students in these competitive colleges and universities because their families can pay the tuition? That's really the question, isn't it?
Yes.
Because they were able to pay the tuition in the private school, so they assumed that they could pay it at the university. The number of people who actually pay the full tuition cost at a college or university in the United States is very small. There are huge numbers of students who are receiving some small financial aid, some very large financial aid. But financial aid is a big component of college pricing. In U.S. private schools, most schools certainly like this, and I know this is not the case here. I know in international schools this is not the case. But in U.S. private schools, certainly was true in my own school, we had 1,000 students. We weren't as big as you, but 1,000 students is quite a few. We had approximately 20% of our students who were receiving financial aid to go to our school. And that's not unusual for U.S. private schools. Some U.S. private schools have as much as 45 to 50% of their students who are receiving some form of financial aid. They are admitted to the school, certainly was the case in my school, based on their academic and personal merit, not on their ability to pay. But we have to be practical. Our largest source of income is tuition. It's true here. It was true in my school too. And so we have to make that, we have to make all the numbers work. But still, that can't explain why we have so many private school students in here, because we have a huge numbers of them who are receiving financial aid. It's because they're good. It's because they know their academic subjects. It's because they know how to collaborate. It's because they know how to work in teams, and they know how to have vision. They know how to be innovators and not just memorizers. It's because they know all those things. That's why they get into these places. It can happen in public schools. And I want to share with you, when did you read Time magazine? At least you know of it, Time magazine. This particular edition, this is the February 24th edition, if you want to find a back copy of that. It's got some very interesting articles in it. IBM has teamed up with a number of public school districts in the United States whose students typically have done very poorly. Typically they come from very poor families where very often there's only one parent in the household, where their parents are not educated particularly. And typically these schools will graduate 64% of the students who are enrolled, and the rest will drop out. IBM also said, we've got a problem. Our requirements for workers are changing as the country becomes, the world becomes more involved in technology. We have a certain number of PhDs who are out there leading us and leading our studies and so on and so forth, and we've got enough PhDs who can do that. We don't need any more PhDs. We have enough people who are at the very, very bottom of the education ranks who can do the manual labor that we require. What we don't have are all these people in between the PhDs and the manual laborers. They don't have the skills, the engineers, the programmers, all of the things that we need. We don't have enough of these people. And so IBM said it's in our self-interest to team up with some public schools and help to produce people who can fill those ranks of workers between the manual laborers and the PhDs. And so they went to these schools in Brooklyn, New York, in Chicago, that were performing so poorly, and they said, let's work with these faculty members, let's work with these parents, let's work with these students, and let's revamp the curriculum, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to take all students. These aren't just elite students. We're going to take everybody. Same number of kids who are dropping out of high school. We're going to take everybody, and we're going to put them through a 6-year program for high school. And when they're finished, they will have a high school diploma, and they will have a 2-year college degree, an associate's degree. And what they also what they will have is a guaranteed job with IBM that will start out at $40,000 a year. Guaranteed. Imagine that. And you know what happened to these schools, and you can read about it. These schools that were used to graduating 65% 64% of their seniors now are graduating 90%. Same kids, same families. They're graduating 90% because they have been given this vision for the future, this vision of being innovators and hope for something better for themselves than they had before. It's a great story. And the reason I'm telling it to you is that if we can do this in schools like that, what can we do in a school like this? What can we do in a school like this with all of the resources? And the very fact that all of you are sitting in this room today, and I mean, that's great that you're here. It takes commitment to come to something like this. It takes your time, it takes your energy, it takes your resources just to be here. In the schools I was describing that graduate 64%, you'd never have a room full of parents like this because they wouldn't see the value in that. So your children are lucky because you are their parents. Your children are lucky because they're attending a school like this. And they're lucky because the world, the future world that is going to be very, very different from the world that we have today, they're going to be prepared for it in ways they simply wouldn't be prepared because they're here. But here's the caveat, and I'm going to stop right here because I want to leave time. I promised you 20 minutes for questions, and that's what we're going to have. They will not have that kind of future unless you are engaged, fully engaged as parents, and unless you're asking these questions of Richard, of the teachers, of the board. What are you doing to prepare my children, our children, for the second half of the 21st century? Because it's going to be different from the world in which we grew up. And explain to me your vision. Explain to me what we're going to be doing. Because I want that for my child. Okay? I thank you for your attention, and I'm ready for your questions. Anything you want to talk about? Yes?
May we have your documents?
I'm sorry?
May we have your documents? You'll just show.
I tell you what, we've been recording it. And it's going to be on your website. So everything that you've heard this morning, you can have from the website. I also did a similar talk on the Pudong campus yesterday. It was a little bit different. It's different every time, but that will also be there. And so you have access to it. Okay? Any other questions? Yes?
Just further to her question.
Yes.
There were quite a few slides that you just skipped over. Will the full deck also be available?
No.
Oh.
No. And you know what I do? I never really know what you're going to be interested in when I start off. And so I always over-prepare. Because my worst nightmare is to be standing here and we don't have anything to talk about. But I will be coming back, and perhaps we can talk about some of these things we skipped over, because we just have a small amount of time today. Yes?
I have a question about, I know we talked about general public schools,
Mm-hmm.
but what about those public schools are like really good public schools? Like, do you have any difference between that and the private schools?
Yes. When I first started teaching, I taught in a public school in New York.
Excuse me, what?
I'm sorry, you're exactly right. Let me repeat the question. Thank you. What about, you talked about public schools, what about the really good public, because there are really good public school districts. And are they like private schools? Do they get some of the same results? So here's the answer. I taught in a very, very good public school district, in not New York City, but in upstate New York. And the way public schools are funded in New York State, and it differs in every state in the country, they're funded by property tax, right? And here's what happens. When you are in a neighborhood or part of the city where there are high-value properties that are highly taxed, the schools are highly funded. And when you're in a part of the city where there are low property values and there are low taxes, they're not well funded. And you can imagine what the differences are. So yes, there are public schools. In our public school, we did not graduate 100% 100% of our students. My guess is that virtually, if not actually, but virtually all of your children will graduate from this school. I mean, if I said you only 89% of them would graduate, you'd be shocked. You ought to be angered about that. That's not what you want. You want 100%, or at least 99.5%, or whatever it might be. But we didn't have that in this public school district, because not everybody, it was still a public school. But we had a very good college placement record, and we were teaching really well. We worked very hard. Our faculty worked very hard on preparing students for the future and so on. So yeah, if you're lucky enough to be in a really good public school district, you can do very, very well. But not all public school districts are like that. Unfortunately, they should be. And this Time magazine article shows that they can be, but they're not. And it's a sad thing. Yes?
Our son started the international school when he was 6 years old. And we're thinking about, now he's in middle school. So we're thinking about to move back to the States after he graduated from junior high, so that he has 3 years of education in the U.S. So I wanted to know, what is your perspective in, should we stay in the international school environment and then extend into college, or should we go back to the States?
Yeah, that's a good question. Is anybody listening? Here's my perspective on that. It depends. That's my honest answer. But here's what it depends on. And let me first of all say that by having your children in a school like this, you are giving them an incredible gift. An incredible gift. They are in an environment where you've got lots of diversity. There are people from all different countries and backgrounds in a school like this. My guess is that your children speak at least 3 languages, maybe more. Isn't that true? No. I remember when I was working at Taipei American School several years ago, I was meeting with a group of 6th graders, and I thought I was saying something very profound when I said to these 6th graders, everybody should be fluent in at least in 2 languages. And this one little boy looked at me and said, only 2? But typically they'll speak several languages. And typically we are preparing them just by being here. We're preparing them to be able to participate in this global future that is going to be even more global than it is now. So that's the good news. But here's what it depends on. Here's what it depends on. I would go to the board members of this school, and I would go to Richard, and I would say, tell me what your graduates do, all these things we've been talking about this morning, and ask them all these questions. Where do they get into college? How well do they do when they get there? What percentage of them graduate? And what do they do after they graduate? And you know what they'll say to you? I don't know. Because they haven't done that. But you know what? They heard it from me last night, and I think they're convinced of it. They're going to start asking these questions. And you need to have the answer to those questions, because there's no way for you to know how well we're doing unless you know the answer to those questions. Take a look at the school. One of our, I think she left, but one of our parents here has got a son at church. I would ask children that question. I don't know whether children knows the answer to those questions. They should, but I would ask that same question. I can promise you, if you go to my school that I headed, they know the answer to those questions. We've been asking those questions for 20 years, and we've got all the data. We know where they've gone. We know how well they've done. We know what they've done afterwards, and so on. And we know how well we're doing as a school because we have those data. That's really the only way you can know the answer to your question, is to ask those questions. Okay? Yes? Okay. Question was, one of the issues we have are teacher quality and continuity. Is there anything we can do to be better about that? Yeah, there is. But first of all, we have to understand, what do we mean by teacher quality? I mean, isn't that fair? Isn't that fair? Sure. What do we mean by that? Well, I can tell you what I mean by that. When I'm looking for teachers, I'm looking for teachers, first of all, and I was dismayed a little bit by a couple of people who shook their heads. I'm looking for teachers who really seek to get to know the kids, get to know them really well, get to know what their strengths are, what their needs are. And teachers who are skilled at meeting those needs, because we don't all learn the same. We have multiple modalities in the way we learn. This is why I use PowerPoint. Some of us need to be looking at something, not just listening. Some of us can listen very well. Unfortunately, what we should be doing, if I were really doing this well with you, I would be, because we need much more time than we have, but I would be engaging you in project-based learning in this thing. We'd be getting together in small groups and discussing some of these issues and coming back and all these kinds of things. And you'd be acting, not just listening, not just sitting in seats with your feet on the floor. That's not the way to teach. But we only have an hour and a half, so that's what we have to do, unfortunately. But I'd be looking for teachers who do that. I'd be looking for teachers who have a really good vision for what 21st century learning is all about. And I would be asking these questions. What skills will my child have when my child leaves your classroom, leaves your division, leaves your school, leaves the college that he or she goes to? There are teachers who have that, and there are schools that do professional development for teachers to make sure that the existing teachers get better at it. I can give you an advertisement for my firm. My firm places teachers all over the world. It places good teachers all over the world, but that's not what I'm here for. But yeah, there are ways to do it better. Surely there are ways to do it better. Professional development is key, really key. Yeah, you'd like elite private school teachers to be in a place like this too, wouldn't you? Sure, it's possible. You want me to give you an advertisement for my firm? I mean, of course it's possible. Oh, you have some, I know you do. You do have some. And you simply, and they don't have to all come from private schools. They can come from some of these wonderful public schools we're talking about. We want good teachers and good teachers no matter where they're teaching. But yeah, there are things we can do about this. Absolutely there are. Yes?
What would your advice be for the board and administration in terms of how to shape essays for the future?
I didn't understand the last part.
How to shape the school for the future?
What is my advice to the board and administration to shape the school for the future? First of all, is to have a vision for what we think that future might be. And we spent a lot of time with the board last night talking about that. I'm coming back in August and we're going to be talking with the board for another 2 days about that. Also, I've tried to get the board engaged with some other thinkers in this country who think about that. Milton Chen is one of them. Milton is a brilliant man. And I urge you, I mean, you know about Sesame Street probably, you've probably seen it, but I urge you to go to the website EdUtopia. That's E-D and then the word Utopia. EdUtopia. Milton Chen, this is the George Lucas Foundation that funded that. George Lucas did Star Wars. There's a lot of money behind that. Star Wars made a lot of money, and George Lucas has poured money into creating a foundation that funds education for the future. And Milton Chen was the executive director for many years of this organization. And when I was talking with Milton Chen in Florida, I said, I'm going to Shanghai American School. And I thought he might have an interest because although he was born in the States, his parents were born in China, and he's got relatives in China. And yes, he has an interest. He has a big interest. And he said to me, gosh, and he scrawled out this note that said to the Shanghai American School, wish you all the very best in what you're doing, blah, blah, blah. He said, would you give this to the board? So I gave it to them last night. And then he emailed me when I got home. He said, I want to give you more. Can I send you my book? And can I inscribe it to the board? And we can give it to the board when you go. And I said, absolutely, I will. And then he emailed me again. And he said, I'm going to be in China next year. Would you introduce me to the school? And I said, yes. So it's my hope, and Richard, I'm glad you're here, it's my hope that you'll be able to get Milton Chen himself to come and talk with you about this, and to talk with the board, and to talk with the faculty about his vision for the future, because it's powerful. These are the kinds of, some of the things we do. It's really professional development for the board, and for the administration, and for the teachers. Yes?
Yeah, two things quickly. So what were your recommendations to the board to bring people such as yourself and this Dr. Chen in on a regular basis, and do they have the budget for it? That's my first question. Answer it, let me ask you another.
All right. My recommendation is, yeah, bring in people from the outside.
Quarterly or?
However you want to do it. But do it on a regular basis. And you've done it. I know, for example, that you had Michael Thompson here.
Yes.
You know, Michael and I worked together for 6 years. He and I were the faculty for the NAIS New Heads Institute at Wellesley College back in the early 90s. This was before Michael was famous. And he and I worked together. I know him very well. He's a powerful thinker, a powerful guy. And I know he was here for a week, I think, to give you parent workshops. So you're doing this kind of thing. And make sure that you've got rooms populated with people when these people come. Do they have the budget? I don't know. I haven't looked at the budget.
Okay, then my second point, I mean, there's no sense in reinventing the wheel.
Yep.
So with respect of us implementing a program whereby we follow up in a year and 5 years and 20 and 30 years with the graduating students, I'm sure you already have a plan, a blueprint, where you know you would introduce the concept to the child and the parents at enrollment time, and then you just kind of roll that out. And how does that happen? How do you describe that to your
That's a very good. Did you all hear the question? You know, how do you do this kind of follow-up with the alumni that I described? The answer is, first of all, yes, you introduce it. I did that last night. We spent a lot of time just sitting around this boardroom table, this gorgeous view overlooking the river and the lights in the buildings and so on, and talking about it. And I said, and so the board said to me, will you send me, and I had some PowerPoint slides for them on the questions we should be asking our alumni. And I said, yes, I will send it to you. So that's step number one. Step number two is the board and the administration need to follow up and do it. And you know how that happens? They'll probably do it. But just to be sure, what needs to happen? You need to ask them to do it. Just to be sure, you need to ask them to do it. Because it really needs to happen.
So do we need to put it on an agenda at a board meeting?
I don't know. That we could. I mean, yeah, you could. You could ask the board, could you please explain to us? Because, you know, we talked with Ralph the other day, and I know he's talked with you. Could you explain to us how you're going to do this? Because we have an interest in it. It's not a question of forcing them to do it. They want to do it. They want to do it. They know it's the right thing to do. They were excited about it. But it's just a question of you being partners with the board in making sure that this kind of thing happens. Okay? Yes? Mm-hmm. That's a good question. And that's really the question in a nutshell. What role can we play as parents in ensuring that we have good teachers here? And how can we really understand the performance evaluation system? And do we have any voice in that performance evaluation? Huh? Is that fair? Okay. Here's the deal. We are customers. Remember, I said I'm a parent. I have 4 children who went through school. I've got 9 in school right now, so I'm a customer too. But I'm a customer and the school needs to pay attention to me. But I, as a parent, don't necessarily, I think I do, but not all parents necessarily are qualified to evaluate teachers. We're qualified to have an opinion, but we're not necessarily qualified to evaluate them in a professional manner because we just don't know what standards we're talking about. But we surely know how we feel about our teachers. So that's point number one. Point number two, as a parent, my horizon for thinking about the long-term future of the school extends to the day my youngest child will graduate from that school. I mean, that's just human nature. So we're not, as parents, necessarily thinking about the future of the school 25, 50, 100, 500 years down the road. That's just not really part of our mindset. But somebody has to be thinking about that vision. And that's the administration and the board. They have to be doing that. And this whole question of the kinds of teachers we bring in, that's there. But let's get down to today. Let's get down to our kids right now. What role should we have? I'm told... No, I'm about to tell you. I'm about to tell you what I think is best practice. First of all, as a parent, I want to know, do you have a performance evaluation system that is regular, consistent, goal-based, and designed to give professional development to... Was somebody whistling over there? Or is that oh, that's a telephone? Okay. You weren't whistling? You know, in France, where I grew up, whistling is like booing. All right. I want to know, do you have an evaluation system? I want to know, what is it? I want to know, you know, how is it administered? I want to be sure that regularly it is done. I want to know that. I'm also told, and tell me if I'm wrong, that you have the opportunity as parents to have a parent satisfaction survey every year. Is that right? Yes. Yeah. So you have the tool. If you're concerned about an individual teacher, I'd put it in that survey. I would. That's all right. Yes, of course. That's end of the year. That's summative, isn't it? That's the end of the year. If you have a concern about an individual teacher right now in March, the way it used to work in my school, and I hope it could work here, the first thing I would do is say, go to the teacher and sit down and say, here are my concerns. I want to be a partner with you. Because there's a role that you play as a parent. You know things about your child that the teacher can't possibly know. But the teacher may know some things about your child that you don't know. So you should be partners. You should be a team. If you don't get satisfaction with that, then you go to the principal and talk with the principal. If you don't get satisfaction with that, I don't know if there are any other layers, but ultimately you end up in Richard's office. That's what I would do. That's what I would do. Yeah, you have to have a voice. Again, the fact that you're here shows me that you're involved. And you need to be partners with the school. You can't do it all by yourself. The school can't do it all by themselves. You need to be partners. All right, we have time for one more question, and then we need to stop. Yes?
My question is regarding best practices in language arts, math, sciences. Do all schools have access to what the best practices are? And if not, how do they get it? Do they use a consultant to gather a lot of information?
You know, there is a ton of literature out there on best practices for various coursework. There are a lot of, Milton Chen is one of them, but there are a lot of people writing very good books. Michael Thompson is another one. I'm another one. There are tons of people who will do that for you. But interestingly, most people are going to be of the same opinion about what we need to do to teach our children to be competitive and to be productive and to be excited about living in the second half of the 21st century. We have a good sense of what that we think that's like. And so yes, those best practices are out there. Do all schools do it? No. But a lot more schools are doing it. And the public schools we were talking about earlier that are beginning to do that kind of thing, the private schools that are doing it very, very well. But yes, they're out there. And they're brought into schools through professional development activities with the faculty with the administration, with the board, with the parents. I want to just close by saying this, and then it's time to stop, because I see Richard's standing behind me. He wants to cut me off.
I need to support you.
But here's the thing. I commend you for being here. I'm really excited that this room is almost completely full of parents. I really commend you for being here. Remember the vision that we talked about today. And remember the questions that you as parents can and must be asking the school to help ensure that your children participate in that vision for the future. You are very powerful people. You're partners in this process. You need to be partners in this process. And just from this conversation today, I think your children are very, very lucky to have you in their lives. And I thank you very much. I've enjoyed meeting with you.
Thank you again very, very much for coming, and I want to thank Ralph. And let me underscore what Ralph told you about the role that you can play, particularly when it comes to questions of your sons and your daughters. Are they getting a good education? Do they have good teachers, and so on? Remember, you are paying us to hire good teachers. You're hiring, hopefully, a good superintendent, great principals who go out and really hire good teachers. So that's what we want to do. Now, if, as the year goes on, you have questions about the teacher, what he or she is teaching, what's going on in the classroom, please first go and talk to the teacher. You don't have to make accusations, you can just ask questions. Say, you know, I hear from my daughter such and such. Start a dialogue. I can absolutely guarantee you teachers want to get to know parents. They want to have a dialogue with parents. We can't educate them unless your partner is with us. If somehow you're not having a good dialogue with a teacher, don't go to the internet, don't go to WeChat, and say, oh, you know, go to the vice principal. Go to the principal and just say, I have these concerns. I would like to talk to you about them. And I'm willing to guarantee you the principals will listen. They will talk to you. But you need to do it in a way that we're partners. We're not making accusations and so on. If you have a principal who tells you, I won't talk to you, I don't care about your opinion, then you call me, okay? Seriously. But we hire the kind of people, and I've worked with them now here at the school for almost a year. They do care about what you think. They do care about their sons and daughters. So don't hang back. Go to where you'll get the information you need. As I say, you're not going to get it on WeChat. You're not going to necessarily get it from your colleagues and your friends and so on. So we will work with you on that, I promise you, because we want to do well by you, by your daughters and your sons. So again, thanks very much for coming. Look forward to continue the conversation. Thanks again.